Mm-hmm.
People like Malaysia not because we always win, and it's not really because that our skills are the best among all players, but it's because we keep trying. And
Oh,
you
definitely.
know why Lee Chong Wei is such a revered sports figure in China when they have like much better sports players
Yep,
like
yep.
Lin Dan,
Uh-huh.
is because of the spirit of Lee Chong Wei.
Hello and welcome to another episode of What Now? Joma Lepa with me, Haikal. And today I'm with a special guest, and we're going and for this specific recording, this is a Merdeka theme episode. And what a better way to actually talk about Merdeka, the theme of Merdeka, is with this person next to me right here. Well, he's not next to me physically, but he's there with me virtually today.
Mhm.
Um, I've we've met. I think we've met in March earlier this year, right,
Yeah,
James?
yeah, I think so. During the book launch.
Yeah, during the book launch. Yeah. Um, I've read his book. It was really amazing. It's called Kancil, and we're very, very pleased to have him on here. Please welcome James Shai.
Thank you so much for having me.
How are you doing, man?
Good, good, good. You?
Oh, actually, I'm a bit tired.
It's a bit too early.
yeah, yeah, literally, because like I was watching the Olympics yesterday.
Mm. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
did
see
you hear
very
the
much.
news about
Yeah,
Azizul?
yeah, yeah. Definitely. Yeah,
Yeah,
I heard it first thing in the morning.
yeah. Honestly, when I first like saw it like around 11 or 12 p.m. in
Mm.
11 p.m. 12 a.m. around that time,
Yeah,
I was devastated. Like, I was really heartbroken.
yeah, yeah. And
Yeah,
this might
so
be his last Olympics, right?
yeah, it is his last Olympics, and when I heard that, I had a hard time sleeping. It's
I
like,
see.
damn. I
Yeah.
mean, um, I think it's because I understand how he feels. So it's like,
Hmm.
oh man, I feel really bad for him. So I was like, I wanted to sleep, but then I had a hard time sleeping. But
Yeah.
but that didn't contribute to the entire reason why I had a hard time sleeping. I think lately I have just insomnia. I think.
I see. But
Yeah. Yeah.
we do have another cyclist
Oh yeah,
that's
yeah,
still very
Shafidos,
fast.
Shafidos. I think that's interesting because I think does give him a motivation for him to actually push harder in the later rounds.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And I think that's still something to be hopeful for.
true, true. And
Mm.
actually, this episode is all about hope because your
Yes.
book Sankansha is all about hope.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, right. Okay, so before we actually jump into this episode, so
Mm.
just to give a little brief to you, James, about what is What Now Malepa. So What Now Malepa is a youth podcast where we talk about all
Mm.
things youth, from nation building to sports to business, lifestyle, right? All of the things to help young people to actually grow and also learn a little thing or two about the different industries in Malaysia.
Mm.
Yeah. So since we want to go for a episode where we talk about hope, because Merdeka is coming around.
Yes.
We're recording this on the 11th of August.
Mm.
Yeah. So we want to really dive into that you know that the idea of being hopeful for a better nation, because I know a lot of young people, especially me,
Mm.
are quite pessimistic. Like we
Mm.
have we have we have our hopes for Malaysia, tapi in the same time kita ada rasa macam boleh ke kita pergi to that
Mm.
direction.
Mm.
Mm-mm. So we want to discuss this in this episode, and I think what better way to discuss it is through your book.
Mm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll be having three segments, and this will be the first segment of the podcast. So the first segment, we're going to touch a bit about your background, a little bit about
Mhm.
your worldview. Okay. And by the way, James, feel free to it's a English podcast. Feel free to use Bahasa Malaysia
Mm.
uh, in this episode too. Right? Okay. So James, maybe you want to introduce a bit of yourself. I heard you were from Oxford, right?
Yeah, so I actually took a law degree for my undergrad, and then I also did policy when I'm at my postgraduate level. Um, I've been at many different industries. I've started in law, and then I went to startup, and also academia. I
Mm-hmm.
write a lot, right? In the media, both domestic and international. At the same time, I went to an MNC policy making, all of these different industries that I, am driven by the central motivation of like what would help me make a difference to the largest group of people. Um, Writing a book, I think, fulfills one part of that in that it helps convey something more personal, more
Mm-hmm.
to the hearts and minds of people who reads it. Um, it if I were to summarize, what I am and what I do, it would always be just following the direction of what I think is most interesting. At the same time, what will contribute to making a difference in my own way, to the country that I live in.
I see. Well, I'm pretty sure you are doing a big difference by writing Sankancha.
Thanks for saying
Yeah.
that. Mm,
I mean, I've read through some of the chapters, and honestly, I think it's for me like it's one of those books where like I don't have to have a hard time getting back reading it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's supposed to be quite accessible, right?
Yeah, yeah, it is, it is. And
Mm,
honestly, I don't know. I feel touched by every story. Like it made
mm.
me wonder how did you get all those information.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just very, very deep research. At the same time, I think, as a writer, you can never know for sure whether something that works for you also works for other people. But I think it does help that after writing for a while, that I roughly could gauge what would work for a large group of people. But at the same time, you are still guided by your own instinct as to what
Hmm.
is important, what is interesting, and what is illuminating that people would say sort of like an aha moment when they read it. At the same time, if there were moments where they were moving, how do you convey that in the most powerful manner? I think all of those definitely were like very deliberate thoughts that I had in writing the book, and I'm glad that it turned out well. At least in your case, right? I'm also very conscious of the fact that um, not every story works for a lot of people. At the same time, a book like that may not work for a lot of people as well. But I think it is meant to be quite accessible, quite for people who are not acquainted with what happened in Malaysia. Is supposed to also be a good introduction of the spirit of the people. At the same time, for people who have been, acquainted and reads the news on a daily basis, this book is also supposed to give you some sense of like a different way of thinking about
Hmm.
our history, what has happened, so that you can look at the country a bit differently, um, from there on out.
I see, I see.
Mm,
And I think it's an interesting book to actually get a fresh perspective of how you see hope in every different character that was said and written by you.
mm,
So I think it's uh it's really interesting to discuss the different types of themes that was inside each of the
mm,
characters, yeah, or each of the people that you mention in the book,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So before we actually talk about Sankachi in the second segment, I just want to ask you one thing because I
Mm,
read like in the beginning of the book, right? You had got the you said that apa, you believe in to do things that are interesting and hopefully it pays the bill. So how
yeah.
has that been going out for you?
Yeah, I mean, to be really honest with you, I'm quite lucky because I think I had opportunities in areas that I'm interested in, right? So not many people have that, which means that in your life, um, I would say most people, you decide based on the choices that are given to you rather than what you want to do. um, for most people it is a struggle, right, in terms of like finding a job that meets is at the intersection of like what you're passionate about, what you are good at the same time what pays you. um, I also think that it is more tempting in life that you follow the well-trodden path of like climbing the corporate ladder, having a very structured environment that gives you
Mm-hmm.
certainty of like what what is expected of you, what will be given to you once you start um, your work in the company, right? But most of the time, that doesn't necessarily guarantee you purpose at your work. At the same time, things that would ensure that you have some sense of like contributing to society. And therefore, in order for you to get something like that, if you carry this whole intention of wanting to give back and wanting to feel like your work is purposeful, you have to be more creative about it, right? So that's why I do things outside of work, either in terms of like an NGO causes that I'm part of, as well as writing, right? All of these things are meant to keep myself engaged as to what's going on, have a point of view about it. If let's say your current job doesn't give you that, right? Um, so for me, last time when I started practicing law, I realized that law has some degree of doing that, but not necessarily all parts of it meets that requirement. So, for instance, if you're a lawyer, there is also a lot of your work that is very corporate in nature, and sometimes it's very hard for you to justify how some of those things will add to a better society that you believe in. But doesn't mean necessarily that that's a bad thing, because you must be able to fulfill your own individual needs first before actually caring about society, right? So, but I think anyone who thinks about a society beyond themselves are also obliged to be more creative in that process, in finding and always looking out for opportunities to do good beyond your immediate work, or as an alternative career to pursue, right? It requires you to take a lot of risk. It requires you to sacrifice certain things that are important to
Mm-hmm.
you, which means that you might get a slightly lower salary than what you would have gotten. But I think the returns that you get in terms of like the sense of meaning, purpose, as well as that sense that you're part of a larger community and you're trying to improve it, um, will probably be more worthwhile in doing that. So in short, I am very lucky in being given variety of opportunities and people trusting me in the process. But I think that also comes with some degree of like proving that you're deserving of some of the opportunities, and also giving yourself what they call career optionality, that are transferable to areas that you're holding out for, or like areas that you're keen to try out.
Definitely. Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I can definitely like agree with you, man. Like it's all about that risk taking, right? That risk taking aspect in actually doing what is interesting.
Hmm.
Yeah. And I think the hardest part from that is actually proving that you can do it.
Yeah. So you need to be very creative in like giving because I think what careers are in essence, right? Are being given the permission to do certain things, right? How do you earn that permission? Do you Your easiest way is through a degree, right? Which means that it's
Yeah.
a standardized exam that a lot of you go through. The better your grades, the better your university, the more permission that you get in life. But that's just one part, which means that you can create your own um,
Pathway.
permission gateways,
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
So either by doing things outside of your immediate studies, if you're at your undergrad, or the things that you do while you're actually working as a fresh graduate, for instance, right? There are many things that you can do for free for other people, um, that most of the time people wouldn't trust you with it, but because you lower down the barrier of entry, a barrier to entry for yourself, you earn the additional permission to do it. So I'll give you an example, right? Like, um, my whole writing part of my career was never really a full-time job, right? I've always done it at the side, and I started writing um, at the end of my undergraduate degree. And in order for me to have proven that I could write something like that, I needed to write quite a lot of like articles for free in the past. And some of it paid, most of them are not paid. Um, and some of the times you don't really get much reward because not many people read whatever you write. And I think that's something that is oftentimes not seen, right? Whereby after publishing the book, I think many people would easily assume that writing comes quite easily. At the same time, it was a linear graph upwards for me, but I had to write almost 10 years before that. At the same time, in order for me to start writing for like international columns, and subsequently, being offered like gigs, projects that are relating to like research, writing, all of these things come from the same notion that sometimes you need to earn certain permissions, and that there are many ways that you can do that, and you don't have to
Mhm.
approach life in a very sequential manner, right? Whereby you
Right,
do
right,
one
right,
thing
right.
after the other. You can do
Mm-hmm.
multiple things at the same time if you feel like those are important enough for you.
Mm-hmm. I mean, when you say that, I relate to it a lot because that's how I feel as well.
Mm, mm.
Like doing this podcast thing as well is also like
Yeah,
allowing me to have other permissions to do other cool things with other people.
that's right. And
Yeah,
also the permission to talk to different people, right? Because you
yeah,
do
yeah,
have a
yeah,
platform that you create for yourself.
yeah, yeah. Definitely, definitely. And
Mm,
I've been doing this for 4 years, and I'll just say like in the beginning it wasn't that easy. Like I think every success starts from somewhere, right?
mm, mm,
Yeah, but I do think that a lot of people like overlook it. If in my opinion,
mm,
like they think that when you like you said like you said lah, like you go from that sequential thing, right? So once you
mm,
if you get a good grade in university, you can get a good job, then you can get a good job, like you can get good
mm.
salary. From good salary you can get good life.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think people do miss out the little things, like the skills that people you know appreciate, like entering extracurricular activities or entering clubs, or even just expanding your skill um on a different level, on on a different level. So I think that is something that you know
Mm,
helps you get that opportunity.
yeah. Mm,
Yeah, yeah, right. But talking about this this opportunity and everything, you're able to write on international columns and everything, right?
mm-hmm,
Like I'm just wondering, like whenever you were writing all those things about Malaysia, and everything, and since you are a political analyst, right?
mm,
So like, have you ever lost hope in Malaysia?
mm.
Yeah.
Um, I think everyone who is Malaysian, who pays attention to it and cares about it, will go through this roller coaster cycle of like emotions, right? And I think anyone who claims that they've always been hopeful in Malaysia is probably lying, or it's either they're lying or they just don't care enough, and it was a very simplistic assessment for themselves, right? Um, I think being losing hope is actually quite easy in Malaysia because there are many things that could remind you why the journey is still very difficult. There are many trends that are developing in the country. Um, they are also very concerning. And anyone who has started working for like maybe 5, 10, 15 years after they've graduated, they also know that there is a huge gap in terms of like what that we're supposed to be able to do and what we can actually do. And I think for people who are high achievers in the country, that sense is even stronger because you really feel like um, you ought to be able to compete more competitively in a more developed economy, right?
Mm-hmm.
That therefore people migrate, they work abroad, and so on because they feel like um, there are definitely more opportunities to fit that intersection that we talked about, right? Where people can still perform very well their work and feel still care a lot about it and get compensated well. Um, Things like corruption, politics of the day, or like what you read sometimes on like comment sections, the things that happen in the news. All of those are definitely opportunities for you to lose hope, right? And sometimes I think we get more of that rather than what are the good news that reminds you of like, oh, things that are still very um, there are still things that you can look forward to improving in the future. But the thing about and that also all of these things, right, which is the existing status quo, sparked the need for the book because I feel like it is actually much easier for you to be disillusioned, for you to feel hopeless in the country, and it's much difficult for you to actually find reasons to be hopeful. And it's not just a simple of like, oh, I have a few like multi-ethnic friends. I am not like a racist, or like, oh, I know people who are not corrupt and therefore the country is hopeful. You need like a strong reason to believe that the longer term trend is in your favor. At the same time, the spirit of the people has largely defined how far we've come. And there are successes that are considered to be unusual compared to other countries. Only then the sense of like hopefulness has like some kind of basis to it. And I was quite insistent that this book is not just a feel good book to make people feel hopeful for a while. There must be a good reason as to why people can carry on some of these hopes. And that's why I think the book emphasizes a lot on the theoretical underpinnings of it, trying to relate personal stories to the larger Malaysian story. At the same time, having takeaways, right, that you can actually, hold on to um, as larger patterns of the country are um, that are formative as well as that are very crucial developmental blocks, right, in order
Mm-hmm.
for Malaysia to reach the next stage of growth, both in terms of uh, where we stand in the world, but also like the purpose of being Malaysian.
Wow, definitely, definitely. And when you say that all Malaysians go through a roller coaster ride of emotions, I definitely can agree with that as well. I think all of us here, even the one who is actually helping on the technical side, Taco, I think um, we go back and forth about explaining our frustrations, and
Mm,
also in the same times we also have a lot of hope for Malaysia.
mm,
Yeah, like
mm,
I don't know. Sometimes it does get frustrating that once we're going on the right direction, and then we just take two steps back,
mm.
and so then we're all in this bubble again.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
but like
Mm,
um actually, like how I know your book actually is actually from, I think I was going through LinkedIn,
yeah.
and I went I saw Nick Nazmi's post about his top 10 reads of the year.
Mm, mm.
So and I'm pretty sure, right? Like your book has gotten praise from very notable people.
Yeah.
Yeah, how does that feel, like knowing that like ministers, very influential people are reading this book?
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely a very humbling thing because um, to to get any kind of acknowledgement at all for something that you create very personally and something like a book does belong in a different category of creation because it does require much more effort, more coherence. At the same time, just a longer term dedication, right, to a particular concept or thought that you have. And to be received that way by Minister Nick Nasmi, and then also a lot of the top economists around the world, some literary prize winners, who took the effort of actually reading the whole thing and telling me about it. Um, all of these things are things that I don't take for granted, right? But at the same time, for me, it matters as much what ordinary people feel about it, because it is as much a book about ordinary people and whether people find resonance to it, right? So I think after some time, when when the book first came out, of course, finding your your friends and your family who are close to you, to be supportive of a book like that is probably uh, the first thing that really makes you feel like this is worthwhile. Um, and subsequently, you have more and more people who are not your immediate circles who also find the book to be a good read, and to talk about it. And lastly, also people that you don't know, right? That the people you have absolutely no degrees of um, uh, degrees of connection to. That's also where it's very humbling, right? Whereby you have like strangers actually picking up quite an expensive book given the international pricing,
Yeah,
um,
it is.
and still finding it to be, you know, worth their time, worth what they spend. So I think those things definitely are, you know, are things that are still continuous blessings that I'm reminded of on a daily basis. But you know, most of all, this book wasn't really about anyone but the seven people, right? So they were the center of attention. And uh, when you write about someone else, you also hold a certain degree of responsibility to write it well. Um, because you know the book wasn't just like all rosy for them. It is supposed to capture a very realistic version of their lives,
Mhm.
um, their grievances, their fears, as much as their triumphs and their joy. And to be therefore able to get to a point where they are satisfied with the outcome, they didn't feel like it's a waste of their time. They didn't feel like I was there to catch them out. I was irresponsible in what I do. That I think is as much an integral part of a book like that, where it is about other people in a very deep way, um, and still be able to, you know, at least have that acknowledgement from them. I think that's
Mhm,
very
mhm.
meaningful. Yeah.
Right, right, right. And it's I don't want to spoil the book to everybody. Like, it's like, you need to read it for yourself. You
Yeah.
need to read it for yourself. But like for me, the first chapter got me a bit teary.
Mm,
Yeah, I think it was talking about anti-birthday.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, like I like the way that you write, how you give a real depiction of how these people go through, right?
Mm,
The the way that they think, the way how they live their lives,
yeah.
and it was really interesting how they were willing to fight for what they believe in to the very end.
Mm,
It feels like what proof that I've gotten from reading all those stories is that you know you don't need to be someone who is very powerful, who's in a position of power to create a bigger change in the community.
yeah.
Yeah, and for me, these ordinary stories prove that you can do it. But actually, I'm kind of wondering, will there be a BM version coming out soon?
Yeah. Be what? Sorry.
Bahasa Melayu.
I think the process of like translation is a very long journey, right? So I think my because if you translate the entire book, actually it's not just like, oh, you put everything to Google Translate, then something will come out, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
It's either you work with um uh a really good Malay author, right, or Malay translator, or you have to do it yourself. And I think the comparison in my mind is that if you were to translate it to other languages, it would take as much time as writing the book itself, right? And is that something that you want to go through again, right? Because going through putting out one book is already quite a
Yeah,
difficult
yeah,
experience.
yeah.
Whether you're going to go through that again, but I'm very happy if anyone's willing to translate it for me. And I'll just go through it. I'll just go through the proofreading and so on. But I think it's very important, and a few people have mentioned it before. So I think it could be planned to see whether there is a whether there's a resonant reason as to this book to be read more widely lah.
Right, right, right. I mean,
Mm,
honestly, I think you should. Like,
mm.
I feel like your book will translate, to a lot of purposeful uh change in Malaysia.
Yeah, why don't
I
you
think I think
translate it, Aika?
I don't know. I'm not a writer yet. I'm only a podcaster, man. I'm only a podcaster. But I do have friends that, maybe that could help you with that process.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe you just let
Yeah,
me
yeah.
know.
Can. I mean, honestly, I would love my friends yang tak berapa pandai bahasa Inggeris would love to read this. I think it's a very good book for
Yeah.
them to actually, get in touch in the local stories.
Mm, mm.
Yeah, and I think some of them are quite famous too, right? I think you also wrote about Fahmi Reza.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
I think a
okay.
lot of Fahmi Reza's
Huh?
followers are also Malay speaking, right? So I think,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I mean, a lot of people still don't know that this story is inside.
True, true. Actually, you know what?
Mm,
Okay, this might be just a spoiler, but I
mm.
did not know Fahmi Reza took engineering. That took me off guard.
Do you take engineering as well?
I am taking engineering as
I
well.
see, I see. So he's a
Yeah,
good role model for you.
he is, and like one thing that aligns me with Fahmi Reza is like he likes listening to rock music.
Yeah,
Same goes to me. I love listening to rock music as well. So maybe that's why for the past few years I've been feeling this rebellion.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So so really, but I'm not gonna spoil too much about the story. You guys should read it lah. But I'll give you that there. He took
Mm.
engineering. Yeah. Right. But actually, before we move on to the second segment, kan,
Yeah.
let's talk about this one question I want to ask. From
Mm.
writing all the stories and meeting all different types of people in Malaysia, right?
Mm.
How would you phrase the Malaysian people?
The reason why I chose Sang Kancil as the name of the book is because that's how I think about the country, which is if you think about Malaysia in a holistic sense that takes into account their history, uh, the people's quality, their beliefs, um, it is like an underdog, right? Most people don't expect a lot from a country like Malaysia, either because they were let down before, or at the same time, you're not in the categories of like great powers in the world, and I think people can accept that in Malaysia. I don't think there is any desire of being like how Great Britain, Germany, US, and now China has really dominated uh, a lot of the world's economic output, technology, increasingly culture, belief systems, those things, right? I don't think there was any desire of Malaysia to be that. I think all that Malaysia hopes for is that whether there can be some triumphs amidst this low expectation. Um, Malaysia is also a story whereby people who understand Malaysia also understand a lot of its um, existing advantages as well as reserve potential that are not really um, tapped. When we had triumphs in history as one of the Asian tigers or like one of the fastest growing economies, they were all instances where Malaysia realized the potential that it always had. And I think even until today, the same thing kind of exists, which is like there's a lot that is quite promising about the country, right? Whereby it sees diversity as a strength, is an open trade economy, is a very neutral zone for being friends with a lot of other countries. people are friendly. There are good enough education as well as like professionalism in the work that we do. There is pockets of like outstanding industries as well as personalities, as well as a lot of resilience in the people who are able to
Mm-hmm.
adapt very well in other countries, competing at the highest levels. Um, all of these things are things that are going in our favor, uh, but we always fall a little bit short from what we are able to do, right?
Yeah.
And that might not be a bad thing, right? Whereby there is a balance in like the excellence that we produce, as well as not pushing ourselves too much to the extreme that it becomes unsustainable, right? So we might grow a bit slower than what we could actually grow if we are at our full potential, but we grow consistently and we keep at it, right? And if you look at a lot of the sports in Malaysia, like even for badminton, either at Thomas
Yep.
Cup or like Olympics, right?
Mm-hmm.
People like Malaysia not because we always win, and it's not really because that our skills are the best among all players, but it's because we keep trying. And
Oh, definitely.
why Lee Chong Wei is such a revered sports figure in China when they have like much better sports players
Yep.
like
Yep.
Ling Dan,
Uh-huh.
is because of the spirit of Lee Chong Wei that was more evident as a trier, as a person who's super resilient and who plays a lot like an underdog, whereby he doesn't have like the physique or like let's say the dominance of much larger players, but he has a lot of the skills and as well as working within the confines, and doing very well, right? So I think most people are drawn to Malaysia because of those things. And I think as long as we acknowledge that and not put ourselves down too much at the same time, not give up too easily, I think that would be a very defining quality uh, of an underdog country like Malaysia.
You know what? Maybe you should write something about Lee Chung Wei. Maybe you should meet him and maybe
Yeah,
write a story
I
about
think
it.
I think his story is very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, you know what? You should also write about Azizul Hasni Awang as well.
Yeah, all of these athletes, right? Who you only know them when they're active, right? But
Yeah.
after that, then you just move on and look for someone else. And I think you skip a lot of what is
What's
very
important?
formative in their life,
Yeah.
especially
Yeah.
when athletes go through some of the toughest trainings, right?
Oh,
Compared to
definitely. Definitely.
all of
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
I mean, they need to go through sort of this brutal training on a daily basis, and we don't go through like what Excel like hardcore training just to
Yeah.
be
Yeah. Yeah.
good in
Yeah.
like Excel, Microsoft Word or whatever, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But they do, right? So I think that's something that is I mean, it's an interesting proposition.
True. 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 I mean, when you say that a lot of people like watching Malaysia not because we win, but because we actually try. Actually, that's actually I can feel that. I can feel that. Like
Mm-hmm.
we're not the nation that brings a lot of athletes into an Olympic game or into
Yeah,
a lot of sporting competition, but we do
yeah,
produce a very one of the best results for a country
yep,
like Malaysia, who is like
yep.
very small.
Mm.
The talent pool isn't that big, but we're able to focus on getting a medal.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and I think just to give context for this Olympics, I can see all the determination and the resilience coming from all the athletes in this year's Olympics. Like kita tengok lah macam dekat Lizija, and then
Mm.
uh, apa the men's doubles, and not just limited to them, but every athlete we can
Yeah.
see they're all doing their best.
Mm.
Yeah, even if they're not winning, they have
Mm.
definitely put a show there for us to remember.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Were you able to watch some of the games?
Yeah, I mean, I watch almost all the badminton games. I think, you know, it's a good example of what Malaysia is capable of, right? Which is like
Mm-hmm.
we might not be the most competent sometimes on the field on that day, right? But somehow that could still turn things around.
Oh yeah,
And
definitely.
a lot of the comebacks are still some of the best that we've seen. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that that really is like what Malaysia is, right? Which is like we we go through hardships with quite a different mindset, right? Because people don't expect a lot from us, right? We okay, we have we orchestrated those upsets, right, against people who are much higher seeded than us. At the same time, all of those moments where you're trailing by so much, and all hope is lost, and somehow there's a surprise for you. And a lot of it in Malaysia is like that as well, right? Most things that happen, sometimes a lot of the good stuff just comes all of a sudden, but they were very important in the milestones of the country.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. I think let's move on to the second segment of the podcast where we talk about Sang Kancil. Right. I think
Yeah,
we'll take a 5 minutes break and then we'll
yeah.
start continuing back. All right. Welcome back to the second segment. I think we're a bit more energized after a very
Mm,
slow start just now.
mm.
Okay. That was partly due to me staying up late yesterday. Yeah. But anyways, I think that let's start with something a bit fresh for this second segment. Because we're
Mm,
going to talk about the books I can share. Unfortunately, I don't have it with me right now.
mm,
It's about Taco, the one who's handling the technical set, has it with him.
mm,
Um, I don't know. Maybe you can ask his opinion later about the book. But for now, I think if I was looking, I think he enjoys reading it.
mm,
Yeah. So like talking about Sakanshi, talking about hope about this book, right? So one of the things that I really wonder when you were writing through the process, like what, how did you like eventually end up with seven people only? Like, did you have other people that you wanted to like include in the book?
yeah, I mean, to be honest, a lot of the processes like that, it's not very different from how similar books like that are written, or like even similar journalism uh, pieces are done, whereby you you have probably an idea of like a few people that you want to talk to, and it all depends on your luck as well, right? How much you're able to reach out to them, whether people know them, and just try to reach out to as many people as possible who may be in their circle, right? A lot of it, because they're much older, right? I mean, I use Facebook, like emailing, or like Instagram quite a lot in terms of like just reaching out to different people to see whether they know the person that I'm trying to interview. And it turns out that these were the few people who eventually decided to spend time with me. And I think I could only have written about a person if they have enough time that they are willing to put aside for a purpose like that. Um, at the same time, for uh, for the ones that I didn't manage to, it is almost the opposite, right? Whereby either they didn't have enough time, don't have enough access to them, um, and there were many more people that I wanted to talk to, that I thought the stories were very very interesting. One of it was the uh, Sabah Kota Kinabalu Sherpa, which means there are people who are mountain guides, and there was
Mm-hmm.
an earthquake that happened at I think it was 2010, that that involved a group of school children, and they had to rescue them during the earthquake itself. And it
Mm-hmm.
was super risky, right? And a lot of people were injured. I think some even dead. I wanted to understand that, which is like what explains um, the altruism that was shown, and why is it that people who have very little to gain, right? And also
Yeah.
working as a mountain guide, the salary is not high at all. Why would you be willing to put so much of yourself aside in order to save someone else, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I thought that that was an interesting story that I wanted to write about, but I just didn't have access to them. A lot of people who who knows about the incident years ago just don't have much memory of what happened. At the same time, all of these things at that time, I don't think much of it was documented other than like news articles, right? And I
Mhm.
wanted to go beyond that. You need to sort of uncover the people behind it, and I think that story just couldn't. I just couldn't find enough people who knows about it, and there were a few more stories that are like that. Um, but there's some stories as well that I thought will be interesting, but it didn't fit the theme of the book, which are like
The
ordinary
narrative.
people, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly. So I think like people like Lee Chong Wei is interesting, Yuna is interesting, right? All of these people, they're more well known, right? And
Yeah.
that's why I think the angle for that is very different, whereby it's if you're more well known, the question is less about your story, right? Because people kind of know what your story is, but it is the underlying struggles, the underlying pains that they had to go through. Um, those I think take a little bit more trust, a little bit more time in order for them to
Right.
accept the fact that there's something that they actually want to do as a project.
Hmm. I understand, and I think like ordinary people, you know, I think it's easy for them to approach them as compared to those who are very, very famous, because you have to go through a lot of the process, like what you have to, whether or not they can accept it, the story is being published or not. Whereas ordinary people, I think they are okay with it, because I think they have a lot to gain than to lose.
Yeah, but at the same time, ordinary people don't think of their stories as like their life as a story. So a lot of the more famous people, they are more conscious of like what kind of life they're leading, what legacy they're building, right? Whereas for
Hmm.
ordinary people, they just go through a day-to-day basis and they don't think too highly about what they do. So the difficult part is like it's more different kind of difficulty, right? Whereby they are more reluctant to actually speak to you because they don't feel like there's much to speak about.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
And what's the word? And I do think that ordinary people have I guess have this like you said, have this underdog effect, because you don't expect them to actually do something big, but in somehow they can produce something that is very impactful to the community.
Hmm.
Yeah. So like one thing that I really enjoy reading a book as well is that you somewhat made the book very easy to read, right? Not in the sense where it's like reading the entire chapter, but like the fact that you had like ways to read it. You had like, I think you can read it within like 5 minutes per chapter, then I think 30 minutes or even an hour or even like a whole week, right? Like how was that? How did you manage to make it effective so that people can appreciate the story without reading the entire thing?
Yeah, I'm very conscious of the fact that people don't really read long form writing anymore, um, because of TikTok, because of social media, and so on. You're used to like bite-sized pieces, right?
Yeah.
So I'm very conscious of like when this book was published. It was published in a time like that, and then I think that idea of like reading it, if you only have 5 minutes, if you only have 10 minutes, if you have 30 minutes, and so on, right? All of these things, uh, it was derived from one of the endorsers of the book. His book. He's a famous economist in the UK. His name is Hajun Chang, and he was the one who actually came up with this method first because I think he was also conscious enough that people don't have that much time. They might be interested, right? But you need to guide them in terms of how do you get the most value out of the book. And I think that honesty is very refreshing. At the same time, I also believe in the same kind of taking the reader where they are rather than where you want them to be, right?
Hmm.
At the same time, throughout the book, I tried to. I mean, my writing style has always been quite simple, right? I believe that um, the whole purpose of writing is to let people to read. and you shouldn't create a lot of difficulty for them. At the same
Yeah.
time, a book shouldn't have like too much words. There must be some degree of like charts, graphs, tables, like just different formats, right? To keep your brain interested in what is
Yeah.
being presented. At the same time, I also think that sometimes there are more effective ways of presenting things rather than just words. Even though words have its place in most of these contexts, it is definitely not the only way
Mhm.
to actually present your information.
Mhm. True, true. And I appreciate the simple way of writing because it does help me keep me engaged, and it
Yeah.
doesn't lose the essence of the story.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, but aside from Mireza, I think one of my favorite chapters so far of reading this book is Nosawami Muhammad.
Yeah.
That was some scoop.
Yeah.
Yeah, like wow. Because of her, we will not get we will not have this one MDB. Najib would, I guess, would you say because of her, Najib it that led to Najib being in prison?
I wouldn't say that because actually there were multiple cases, right? Eventually, Najib went to jail for something called an SRC case, right?
Hmm.
Which is not, okay, they're all like a web of interrelated cases, right? But how judges decide is based on the specific cases,
I
based
see.
on the specific circumstances around it, right? But it was very important because some of this information, even though they didn't, materialize in like a legal conviction specifically on certain issues, it might not that it doesn't mean that it's not important for people to have known that, right? And uh, the Noor Sawani story is still one of the most impressive stories that I've ever heard of, and I think it is severely underreported. I think it's not known to people that it is so
Yeah,
important as a story because she's the classic example of what an ordinary person is, right?
she is. Is
She went through the grind of civil service. If you look at her, most of the time you won't remember how she looks like. She doesn't really speak much, um, and she shied away from like attention, and but yet she did something that was true to her integrity, but at the same time it's something that she doesn't think is a big deal, right? And I think that is sort of like the perfect kind of ordinary story I wanted to write about because I was fascinated with it for a very long time, and she was the first story that I really wanted to write about. And for me, it is kind of like, if that story wasn't there, there wouldn't even be a book like that. Or like, um if I couldn't write about that story, I would rather not write about the whole book. So that was how important that story was to me. um and the challenge for me is just to find enough interesting facts that either people do not know of, or like escape everyone's attention even though it's published in the internet, uh and to build it in almost like a bit like a thriller format, right?
yeah, yeah,
That
yeah, yeah.
feels like you're reading a fast-paced, sort of investigative piece, right? And I think uh it was, the piece that I finished the fastest as well, because when I built that storyline, the story wrote itself. So
Wow.
I was very happy with how it turned out. Yeah.
Like um, okay, like out of all the stories that you've written, right? Like, what was your emotions going through writing all the different type of stories? Like, were you like what was the roller coaster like?
Yeah. So I think for No Sawani one, um it was the most rewarding in the sense that sometimes when you write about a certain story, you don't have everything that you want to make a good story, right? Because sometimes if the facts aren't there, or like if you didn't discover anything new, then it is more challenging for you to achieve something like that. Whereas for her story, it is much more rewarding in the sense that you got everything that you wanted.
Mm-hmm.
through research, through reading like witness statements, those kind of legal documents and so on. And there were so many things that people miss, right? So I thought that okay, those were the most rewarding stories. Um, for stories like Fahmi Reza, I feel like uh, if I were to put it, it's the best story I have written in terms of a technical ability, right?
Okay.
In the sense that if I feel like there is an evidence of like what I'm capable of doing as a writer, it is probably seen through the Fahmi Reza story. Um,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of like Auntie Bersih's story, I think it is the most moving story for me. It's the most human story, and it is still the one that, upon thinking about it, I would still be very touched by what I discovered. Uh, Dr. Serena's story
Yep.
um, was the most unexpected for me, whereby
Okay.
I didn't go in thinking that the story was anything more than her winning the award, but it came a story about huge resilience, right? Of like the discrimination that she had to go through, her childhood, all of those backstories, which I felt like was very unexpected, but it made the story so much better than what I initially would have thought. Which means that whatever I discovered, once again, nobody knows. Nobody has written anything about it
Yeah,
in
yeah,
detail.
yeah.
And then there was the Peter Kalang story. I thought that story about saving his community was the best hero's arc story, whereby you have almost a
Oh.
classic protagonist, and an antagonist that was very strong, and how he
Mm-hmm.
was able to overcome it, right? And it's one of those great stories that once again skip a lot of people's radar. And the last story that I had was the one of Marcus Yen, the photographer, the war photographer. That
Mm-hmm.
was the most I would say the most epic story that, even upon hearing about it at first glance, right, about him going to Afghanistan, war torn situation, and what he captured, what he saw,
Mm-hmm.
was was the best example as to what we are made of as a society, as a people, and I think that was the chapter that I found to be like, no matter how you tell it, even though you are a very bad storyteller, the story itself is enough to convince you that he has done something really great, right? So
Oh.
I would say that that's how I would phrase it. That's how I think about these stories as well. When I was writing it, as well as after I've written it, what reflections I could have, um, uh, that takes me away at
Mm-hmm.
the end of the day. Mm.
Mm-hmm. So in some way, all the stories have a personal touch to it that makes you feel it amplifies, it speaks volume.
Yes, yes, that's what I
Yeah,
felt.
yeah. Same here, same here. Um, Honestly, like going to like I don't know, it feels I don't know. I know I'm praising a lot, but I'm generally saying this because it does make me feel this way. Because like it reminds me of reading Trevor Noah,
Mm.
Born a Crime. Have you read that book?
Yeah, I think it's an amazing book. I don't think that's
Yeah.
the comparison, because that book is much, much better.
Okay, okay, maybe not in terms of the writing, but in just in
Yeah.
terms of the feeling that I went through.
Mm, mm,
Yeah,
mm.
I think that's like the second book I felt like that made me felt like going through a roller coaster of emotions. It felt like I was reading and visualizing a movie.
Yeah. That's how I wanted to write it. And to be very honest with you, there's one more group of people. They're not an individual when I wrote it. It was the Guwara Sahib Petaling Jaya story, right? The one about the flood. That one I felt like, once again, it was the one that fit the theory that I wanted to bring the most, which is like this whole servant leadership, leaderless leadership concept, right? Which,
Hmm.
once again, one of the easiest chapters for me to write, because the people there were really amazing. And sometimes, I think sometimes if you come across some people who are ready stories for you to actually write about. And to be very honest, that whole writing like a movie, writing like a story thing was made a lot easier um because of the people that
People.
I've met, right? If you
Mhm.
look at the GSPJ story, the characters themselves are so interesting, right? The main person, Pavan, who was actually supposed to be the leader in charge, was barely seen, rarely considers himself like leading anything, right? He in a huge rescue effort, he was just making curry in the kitchen, even though he was like the real leader in instrumenting most of the decisions in the rescue efforts. Um, and they were, all of the characters, some of them were like fathers who really cared for their children but just went through the deep end of the flood. Some were operating the entire almost like a line manager at a factory. Some, their character was very bubbly. It was so easy to talk to them. At the same time, they were like full of energy and feel like they have to constantly still keep at it because people are still suffering. All of those things, I think, made the writer's job much easier, right? Whereby you are just arranging certain things in a way that makes sense so that their
Mhm.
story would feel more like a movie, which I think is actually the easiest part of the job.
Mm. I think anything in general
Mm.
is, if you have amazing people behind you, it makes the job more easier. I
Yes,
guess
yes.
like you being on this podcast is making my job more easier.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
Like,
understand what you're saying. Yeah.
yeah, like but when I was hearing how you actually wrote those stories, like how it made you feel, right?
Yeah.
I honestly, like throughout this journey of podcasting, that's how I feel the same when I interview my guests.
Mm, mm,
Yeah, like I don't usually approach people that are famous, maybe
mm,
somewhat famous, like I guess, to paint you a picture. The
mm,
most I gotten was like maybe around 20K on Instagram.
mm,
That maybe that's how famous that person was lah. That's
mm,
the range lah.
mm,
So like, you know, um, sometimes the stories that I get really just amazes me. Like,
mm,
and the fact that they're just ordinary Malaysians doing out their daily things is
yeah.
really interesting how they live their lives.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and based on what you said just now, I might just want to write a book
Mm,
just about
that's
them.
true.
Yeah, maybe I can just collaborate with you, man. Like honestly, I would love to collaborate with.
Yeah, yeah,
Maybe,
yeah.
yeah, maybe Sang Kancil Part Two or something, or maybe I don't know. Maybe you have another book that you have in mind that you can talk about Malaysia. Do you have that in mind?
Not at the moment, not at the moment, because I think um, it's true. After you've written one book, you almost swear that you never write another one
Nah.
because it's just very very long,
It's a
right?
natural thing. It's a yeah,
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 and I think it's super time consuming, and it's something that you need to think that it's worth doing, right? And sometimes after you've done it, you have a sort of like a hindsight, right? Looking back, then you think that okay, maybe it wasn't that hard at certain points. But if you were honest with yourself, then you know that it is very challenging. But I
yep.
don't know if I think to me, I'm actually uh quite careful about like sequels, like
Oh
trilogies
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
everything,
Because
right?
you want to live up to the hype of the first, right?
Yeah, but at the same time also like it would doing a part two or part three about something, I'm not so drawn to it because
Mm-hmm.
it always would feel like a diluted version of the part one, right?
Okay, okay, right, right.
Um, if, however, there is a different angle to it that is probably similar enough, but not entirely similar. So, for instance, one about all just athletes, right? I
Mm-hmm.
find that to be more interesting actually because it feels very different. But at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
you're following some teams that you really believe in, but it's a different book altogether. And I think therefore that would have like a place of its own. And I think creating things like that would actually have more meaning to myself. And I think it also maintains some readers' trust, right? Whereby they
Yeah.
give you the benefit of the doubt, they took the chance in reading your first book. You shouldn't just sort of like abuse that trust in coming up with something that is like just a continuation, like
Or so
like
like you go for another different angle.
yeah. So only then you can maintain the trust as well as the interest of the author, right? No, the interest
Mhm.
of the readers, right? Because then
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it would feel like they don't fully get what the author's trying to do, and therefore it keeps them engaged with what they
Mhm.
do next.
I mean, you know what James said? If you're doing a book about athlete, just call me up, man. Like I just wanna
Yeah.
be part of that process.
Yeah. Definitely, I'll let you know.
Like I mean, I have a few athletes you might want to consider interviewing.
Yeah,
Actually,
actually, there
I,
was
hmm?
there was one I've forgotten his name. The Paralympic athlete that won gold.
Is it the
What?
badminton player or is
No,
it the
no, no.
one
It was the
the
runner. It's a
sprinter?
run. The sprint.
Oh, Muhammad. Yeah, Muhammad Rizzi Buzi,
Rizwan.
I think. Rizwan
Yeah,
Buzi. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Rizwan Buzi. I think he was the one that I wanted to interview. Uh, and I actually engaged with the coach. I think it's Coach Jega, right? Who they
Yeah,
have
Coach
like this
Jagger. Yeah, yeah.
father, almost like a father-son relationship. And I remember uh, the athlete was very upset and he cried when Jaga's Coach Jaga's contract was not renewed. Um,
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah.
yeah, for me that is a perfect story, right? In other words, it's a gold medal story, so you can write it almost like an exhilarating movie again, right? In the moments leading up to the goal. At the same time, uh, Coach Jaga's story is also quite incredible, right? So I thought that that is the kind of story that I want to write the most, right? Where it is beyond the surface level um, achievement, which is already super great, right? So it already makes for a super great story. But if you have a great backstory, right, as to the struggle that he has to go through, the relationship he has with the coach, and what they had to go through together, I feel like that's a bit like the movie and the book The Blind Side, right? It's a
Oh,
bit like
yes.
yeah, it's a bit
Yeah,
like that, whereby it is beyond the sports achievement. Even though the sports achievement was great, it goes beyond that, and I think
Mhm.
uh, that was something I didn't pull through in this book. I didn't have enough time or access to the right people to talk about it. But if there is a book about sports and the Malaysian athletes that we have, this is one really good angle.
Okay, okay. Well, I mean,
Mm.
you know what, James said, talking about athletes, right? We're actually gonna produce a documentary about one.
Oh, really? What is it about?
So do you know Sariat Kim Wen?
No.
Okay, it's alright. So like, well, that's good that you don't know because we're gonna release it soon. I think maybe in September, so you can watch it. But
It's a
like her
documentary.
story, it's a documentary. So like we just finished filming it last month.
Mm.
So we're just right now editing and hopefully we'll be finished in September. But like the story goes like this. So like Taekwondo Pumse, or
Mm.
people know it as the pattern of Taekwondo, like doing the
Mm.
patterns and everything, right? So
Mm.
like that sport isn't as famous as the sparring side of Taekwondo.
Mhm.
Yeah. And like if I'm not mistaken, before this, Taekwondo Pumse wasn't like a recognized body in Malaysia. Like they wouldn't send, athletes to overseas just to compete in international tournaments and be competitive about it, right? So like
Mm.
Stara Yap and I think Jin Kun were like, and another person was like the pioneer of the sport.
Mm.
Yeah. So it started in 2011, where they
Mhm.
first entered the Sea Games.
Yeah.
Yeah, entered the Sea Games, which they did pretty well. They won bronze. They won silver, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Mhm.
But their success rapidly, rapidly moved fast because like within the 10-year period from 2011 to 2021, they were
Mm.
able to gain a lot of big achievements.
Mm.
Notably was during the 2018 Asian Games, where they won
Mm.
bronze, the
Mhm.
highest that they've won for Malaysia.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, I
Wow.
mean in terms of multi, multi event where a lot of people know lah.
That's good. So I mean
Yeah,
that's something that I really didn't know before.
yeah, and like I think because and I think in 2028, I think the Olympics they're planning to also include Taekwondo Pumse.
Mm.
In
Mm.
the so like because they've already included taekwondo, they've already included karate.
Yeah.
I forgot what it's called. Like it's the pattern of karate lah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
So we're expected to see that taekwondo pumse in LA 2028.
Oh,
So
really? Oh,
yeah,
so a
it's
real
expected.
chance.
Yeah. So like and I have been in contact with the current team as well. Just
Mm.
only one of the members, and like,
Mm.
but looking at the achievements, it's very promising.
That's very good to know. And I think I'm looking forward to your documentary because it's stories like that that I hope more people be aware of. And to be
Yeah.
honest, sports stories are always amazing.
Oh,
I feel
definitely.
like it's
Yeah.
one of these things whereby it's a classic hero's arc, right? You go through your ups and downs, and eventually the triumph,
Yeah.
and so whenever they win or they lose on the biggest stage, it's so emotional for them because it's all bottled up, leading up to
Correct.
that moment.
Correct.
And there's nothing quite like it in life, whereby you have like this one opportunity to practice everything that you have worked for, and this is the moment of truth. It is so much pressure and it's so intense.
It
And then
is.
like the badminton games that we watch is some of the most emotional roller coaster that you've ever gone through, right? And
Yeah.
that's why when they come back, people are so it's sort of like crazy for them because when you've gone through that much emotional sort of like volatility with one person, you also develop an attachment for them even though you
Oh,
don't know
definitely.
them,
Yeah.
right? You feel like you know them and you feel like you really care for them uh, because you've gone through that journey together somewhat, in the most amazing moments.
Definitely. And like, and I love how sports make you feel so attached to the
Yeah,
players. Like, you don't know them, like, but you know them through
yeah.
the screen. But like, like, just through their emotions, they've gone through something that you probably don't know, but understand how they feel.
Yes, yes. Mm.
Yeah. So I'm really looking forward for that story, and I think there's some hidden aspect that maybe not many people know how it feels like to start a sport that is not recognized in Malaysia to becoming a uh, very prominent sport in Malaysia now.
Mm. Yep.
But yeah, I mean, I can't share too much details because, like, it will lose the spark of the story. But I'm just hinting in there, lah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's good. That's good.
But
Mm.
like, talking about stories, right? Like, I wonder, was your target audience, young people as well? Because like like Malaysia, we can see that there is a lot of young people out there, right? And there's a lot of they have a lot of optimism and hope. So like I was
Mm.
just wondering, like, were you targeting those people? And I don't know, like, and were you even considering, you know, to include somebody young in your book?
Mm. Uh, yeah, I think both yes, but at the same time not deliberately, right? Because I think when you write a book, uh, you can't really at least a book like this, right? You can't really categorize the age profile that you're trying to target because
Right.
you're more targeting a certain kind of people, a certain kind of people in the sense that either they care about the country, but then they are very skeptical, very cynical about it. Um, or you're targeting people who don't quite know about the country and want to understand the country, right? So this is an access to understanding. Uh, at the same time, you're also looking for people who are hopeful and want some degree of validation to what they feel. This is also the other group of people that I feel um, this book is catered for. Now, naturally, I think young people are more hopeful than older people, to be honest,
Yeah.
right? And I think um, the young people who reads this book are likely people who already care to some extent about what's going on in the country, and they don't particularly feel like all is lost, right? Even though more and more we are seeing young people feeling disillusioned earlier, but I think generally that's not the case. So I think what they benefit from, hopefully, is that sense of perspective, um, that understanding of what came before them, and therefore what else to carry on during their generation. Now, I, I I really wanted to include people who are younger in this book, but the tricky part is that a lot of the stories here require you to have gone through some life
Degrees and that.
experiences,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
yeah, and to have achieved something to some degree, right? And sometimes you do need to live long enough to have those moments in your life. So, for
Right,
instance,
right.
Dr. Serena couldn't have won her award much earlier than how when she won it, right? She only started her PhD around like 30, 31, and therefore she couldn't have won it around her 30s, right? Um, but at the same time, uh, the stories here are supposed to be instructive to some extent about what it looks like slightly ahead of the road, right? Rather than
Mm-hmm.
um, telling the stories of like young people who made it big, which I don't think is actually something that we should pay too much attention to, other than sports, really, because sports is the only arena whereby you can achieve something really great really young. um, Generally, I think it's we should take an approach as society, right, whereby everyone goes at their own pace, and ultimately, um, success is less defined by the achievements that you have at a certain age, and more defined by how you grow as a person,
Mm-hmm.
how that benefits society. So I think those were more of my conscious decisions rather than searching for age, right? In terms of
Right.
diversity, I really tried to cover as wide a spectrum of people as possible in terms of an ethnic background, as well as where they come from, more than the age factor.
I see, I see. Understandable, understandable. Because the reason why I was also saying this because, you know, um, I think we have a lot of emphasis, especially when we pass down the 2018 bill, right? There's a lot of emphasis of young people. So I know I was wondering if
Yeah.
there was the aspect, but I guess in the book you you were relating to some of the stories of how they were young. So I guess that also can be
Mm.
included.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. But since this is, I think, okay, I hope don't cancel me, but I hope I don't get this wrong. It's the 65th year of we're having independence, right?
Yeah. No, was
Okay.
it 56? No, it's 1957, right?
Yeah,
No, it's
yeah, yeah. So
67, right? 67. Yeah.
okay, 67. Okay, is this okay? 2 years off, but anyway, still, 67. So like, um, one of the things about Merdeka or in any country, right, is
Yeah.
that we like to glorify leaders.
Mm.
Like kita like in just in dalam konteks Malaysia, we glorify I guess Tunku Abdul Rahman, and then I guess to an degree, to an extent, Mahathir,
Yeah.
right? But you know, but we rarely forget to include the normal people who actually, you know, makes a lot of the country run, right? We're talking
Mm.
about the ordinary people like you just written. So do you think for this year, maybe we can start thinking about the people around us, the ordinary people that are making change, over than just glorifying or over glorifying the leaders of the nation?
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, when you go to like bookstores and so on, most of the Malaysian books are people who are like larger than life personalities. And it's just not realistic, right? In thinking about history in the sense that, oh, only these people define it. It's just that people are very drawn to it, right? So even outside of like politics, when you read about Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, you always assume that without these people, history wouldn't have turned out a certain way. But at the same time, it is, although it is a necessary understanding, it's not a sufficient understanding, because they were instrumental, but they were not the only reasons as to why certain things happen. And I think sometimes for a country like Malaysia, where we do glorify leaders in a more obvious way, to an extent that sometimes we think that we are submissive to whatever they decide. We are sort of like apologists for what they do. Um, I think that's unhelpful, right? Because it makes us lose autonomy and agency in what we can do to affect change. And I think the book is precisely meant to remind ourselves of the reality that is the opposite of what is being portrayed.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Definitely, because talking about leaders, do you ever look up to any one of them, or do
I
you
think
look into skepticism?
I wouldn't say that I look in skepticism. So I understand actually leaders are very important in society because it is sometimes required in order for a group of people in society to dream bigger, to convince ourselves that certain things are not impossible. Um, but you also start to realize one thing, right? Which is like leaders have tremendous flaws as well. More and more, I think in recent times, right, more books have started to uncover sort of like the darker side to a lot of these leaders who are considered to be
Right.
great. And I think that's a good thing to understand that they are human as much as everyone else. Um, at the same time, it is very dangerous to place your bets in any hero figures or any like role models in your life. Chances are you need a series of role models and you take what is good and beneficial from each of them, and not take part and parcel, and therefore everything that the leader does I have to follow, right? So it's supposed to be sort of a guidance for you, that you only follow aspects that you think are helpful, in order for you to be a better person. So I think
Mhm.
for me, I used to have a lot of those like heroes that I look up to, but I'm very conscious of not doing it deliberately, because I recognize the fact that um, it doesn't work like that, right?
Yeah.
In order for you to excel. So, for instance, even in sports, right, a lot of these athletes, they don't just look up to one player, right? They look up to maybe there will be one player that they follow the most, that they feel like, okay, I really have to copy that
Mhm.
style of playing. But they take from everyone. So, for instance, LeBron James, he learns from Kobe Bryant, he learns from Olajuwon, he learns from Kareem Abdul-Jabbar for different things, right?
Mhm.
And all of these are very important in making him the athlete that he is.
True, true. I mean, we all have different types of people that we look up to as well. But yeah, we have that one person that we heavily heavily influenced from it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think that's a nice way to conclude this second segment, and I think we'll go for the more spicy segment, which is segment three. I
Mm-hmm.
think they're quite bold of me saying this, some of
Mm-hmm.
them. So really excited to see where this goes. So thank you for sharing about including the seven stories that you said about you know all the people in Kancil. I guess talking about the sports aspect of hope, and I guess one thing that I did get from that segment, that we have a lot, we do have a lot of common when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
sports. We do
Yeah.
have that passion as well, and it's also quite interesting to talk about whether or not we should glorify leaders or look into the different types of people around us.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think this that segment is about reflection. So we'll see you then. Okay. So let's go to the spicy segment of the podcast, right? So segment three. So I had fun fact about all these questions that I'm gonna ask you, James Shah, is that you know me and my friend Taco here, we had a fun time asking very spicy questions to you for this episode. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I'm not sure the level of spiciness for you, but maybe for the general viewers, maybe it's quite spicy lah. We're
Mm-hmm.
gonna talk about Reformasi, maybe about Mahathir, and I guess in some way how voters should actually aggressively change, especially for those who are young,
Mm-mm.
right? So let's move on. Let's dive in deep into what we have in store for James Chai for the reflection segment of the podcast. Okay, so let's start with the big question here, because since Anwar Ibrahim is in power, right, and we all know he's very vocal for Reformasi
Mm.
since in 1998. I'm not sure about me, but like a lot of young people don't know this, or maybe don't care about it. But to me, that was the biggest, the biggest thing that happened in Malaysian politics, which is
Mm.
asking for a change in government.
Yeah.
But now he's in power, then things changed a bit. You can see a bit of his policy, and with the what's the word with the unity government. So, do you feel that Reformasi, the perjuangan, has overstayed its perjuangan?
Uh, so Reformasi is the largest and most sustained protest movement that the country has ever seen. It started from 1999, and you're right that there's some claims that it succeeded its aims in 2022, right, which is almost
Mm-hmm.
like a 23-year period. Now, I think at that time there were people were asking for two different things, right? Or like three different things. One is that for Anwar to be released from prison, there would be like a main thing, which eventually happened. Um, Second is for the government to change, because we never had a change of government before 2018. And lastly, for Anwar to be prime minister, which is something that happened in 2022. So if you look from that count, what Reformasi intended to do has actually reached its aims after 23 years, which is quite an incredible story for them to hold on to.
Yeah.
Um, Especially when all of these people who fought during Reformasi period are now very old already. So at least they lived to be able to see it. And I remember in the
Mm-hmm.
moment where Anwar became prime minister, a lot of these people who are called Otai Reformasi were very moved by that moment, right? Now, but there is also a part of it that I feel like throughout most protest movements, as well as most perjuangan in the country, that were not sufficiently addressed, is that what happens after you govern, right? Which means
Right.
that, to be honest, most of these Otai Reformasi, if you ask them what is it that you want to implement after Anwar comes to power, what do you want to see being done? They will give you very different answers, right? So some people will say
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
oh,
yeah.
I want justice. Some people say that I want civil liberty. Some people say that I want poor people to be uplifted. Some people say I want negara jadi maju. So there are many different interpretations as to what that is, right? And to be very honest, if the central cause was justice, uh, it does require you to do many different things, right? It requires you to firstly uplift and eradicate poverty, right? Which is a huge task on its own. It requires
Mm-hmm.
you to fairly distribute the wealth of the countries, and that
Yep.
doesn't just include like the poor, right? But it primarily includes them. At the same time, there's also a lot of claim of like, oh, multi-dimensional poverty, which means that other than just income, right, you're looking at different aspects of the life of the poor, which is a very integral part of like what justice in the context of Anwar Ibrahim
Mm-hmm.
entails, right?
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, justice also requires freedom to be protected, right? So it requires you to care about freedom of expression,
Mm-hmm.
allowing freedom of speech, no censorship, no restrictions, that kind of thing. At the same
Yeah.
time, justice also requires you to have no corruption, which is like one of Anwar's biggest agenda, right? No corruption, no
Correct. Correct.
cases, um, transparency, no abuse of power, that kind of thing. So institutionally, justice also has to be seen. And lastly, of course, justice also has to be seen in terms of like the growth opportunities within the country. To be able to be a successful country, you need to participate in like science and technology. growth industries like renewable energy, semiconductors, those kind of stuff. So it requires you to have that holistic assessment of
Mm-hmm.
what the society needs to become.
Mm-hmm.
I think when people are either on the side of like, oh man, Reformasi is dead, or like, oh, Reformasi has fallen short of its aims, or like some people say, hey, actually, we're on the right track. When it comes to like difference in terms of opinions, I think it comes down to the fact that the objective itself is not clear for everyone, which means that different people want different things. And to be very honest with you, to govern a country and to mobilize a protest movement from that time, you require it to be a bit broad based, right? Only then you get everyone's buy in. But the truth is that if you peer under the lid a little bit, you realize that people want very different things from one another, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like you need to assess reformasi in that manner, and the reality also is that uh progress is not made in a very short period of time, and therefore
Correct, 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 correct.
you are probably most likely to make proper assessment only years after it's happened. So for instance,
Yeah.
whatever effects of like Mahathir's policies in the 80s to like the 2000s, we kind of only know it in the past 10 years, right? We can only properly assess what he's done in the past 10 years. Doesn't mean that some of the mistakes that he has done during that time itself we are blind to it, but
Mm-hmm.
some of the things that are harder to assess, you do require a little bit more time in order for it to know for sure. But at the same time, Mahathir had the luxury of like 20 plus years
Yeah.
to be able to prove his vision. um, I'm not saying the same that you must give for this government, but it's also true that I think assessments at this stage of like, oh, where Reformasi belongs might be a bit premature unless you are able to assess it more holistically.
I see. So you see that Reformasi should be assessed maybe once Anwar has stepped down being the prime minister.
Yeah, I think something of that nature, or like the fact that you need to pass through one term, lah. You need to pass through one term of like 4 5 years to be able to know for a fact what
Mm-hmm.
is he trying to do and whether that makes sense to you or not, right? But even then, right, it's also very important in a society to assess things holistically, because just because you don't like one particular thing that he's done doesn't mean that that's the wrong thing to be done for society, because you represent one segment of society, and sometimes that is either the minority segment, or like that segment doesn't necessarily have like a wider implication that are
Mm-hmm.
positive for the rest. In other words, how do you think about things beyond yourselves, right? That I think is a very important prerequisite in order for you to assess how well things are going in the country.
Mm-hmm. But I don't know. Do you feel like Anwar is also like, how do I say this? Like he's trying to be a people pleaser in some sense.
Yeah, I think
Like.
that has always been quite consistent in him, right? Because if you think about his history, he came from uh, his earliest times, I think, champion like the Malay poor in Baling, and then
Mhm.
he joined the Islamic student movement, right? That
Abin,
eventually
yes.
became ABIM, which was a very influential movement. And then when he went into UMNO, it was a slightly different group of Malays again, right? More Malay
Hmm.
professionals, middle class. And
Yeah.
when he went out of UMNO, he started championing a lot of the multi-ethnic rights, and I think he was one of the most radical in terms of like talking about needs-based affirmative action, right? So all of that has necessarily both made him a very a very sort of acceptable leader for a lot of people, which
I
in this
see.
country there are not many people that are able to command sort of like some degree of trust in all of these different communities, because it like, all
Hmm.
exists in silo, right? But at the same time, that made him sort of like a more, like some people could perceive as a bit weaker because you are not able to stand your ground, right? For
Mhm.
instance, you need to please everyone, and therefore, in the end, you please no one, right?
Mhm.
So I think it's actually a very interesting question to ask. I don't have the answer to this because do you prefer a leader that maybe either champions the Malay rights or the Muslims' rights, or just championing, let's say, the non-Malays' interests, and that's enough, and then him standing his ground somehow would make this country better? I don't think that's the case, right? At the same time, if you have a leader like Anwar that's able to appeal to different groups, not overstating certain things so that it alienates another group, is that necessarily a bad thing, right? And I think oftentimes uh, that is the toughest part, which is like if you were in his position, would you do the same thing as he, or would you do it very differently, right? If you were to do
Mhm.
it differently, are you confident that the outcome would be as peaceful, or there wouldn't be like riots, or like polarization that would exacerbate, right? So I think
Mhm.
it's much harder if you assume the role of a leader. But of course, sometimes some people say that you're very powerful at your position, and therefore oftentimes you don't have to be so afraid of the consequences as you were as an opposition leader,
Right,
right?
right, right.
um I think reality is definitely much more complicated than what people give it credit for. uh
Mhm. Mhm.
but but I feel like it's probably fair for people to feel some degree of disappointment, right? On
Yeah.
certain things that you care for but you don't get, right? But at the same time also being more trying to also assume the role of a leader in the country that is at this state right now in Malaysia that is very polarized. uh Whether you think like a like an assertive, slightly sort of like a strong man is what is best for the country, or do you
Mhm.
think a person that is more consensus driven, less hardline would be best, right? So that is a question for everyone to assess.
Mhm. Now, yeah, that is a question for us to all assess because I think that Malaysian dream has become very, or I wouldn't say diluted, but I just say that it's become so opinionated. Everybody has their
Mm.
own opinion of what Malaysia should be,
Yeah.
and I don't know. And I'm not sure if it's Anwar's job to make people realize that vision,
Mm.
but I think to me it's just hard for me to personally lah. I find it a bit hard for me to relate or feel connected to it because
Mm.
it's hard for me to see that bigger picture of where we're going as a nation. Because if
Mm.
I see, because one, because because for me, what I understand about Reformasi is that you want to have institutional change,
Mm.
like getting fairer elections, having better democracy.
Mm.
But, um, I see that progress is not very, like, not much progress. It's
Mm.
kind of, you can see it, but not directly impacted.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think that's everybody. We should everybody should comment on the comment section below. What do you think Malaysia should go? What's the direction? Because
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious as well what we all want to think for Malaysia.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah. But yeah, like talking about Anwar as well. Before we move on to the next spicy question, which relates to Mahathir, like,
Mm.
but do you feel like his policy or his decision, his public statements is like it's okay, but it doesn't do any harm. And maybe that's influenced because he's in a unity government where he has to cater to different types of parties.
Mm.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I think so. I think it goes back to the same point, right? Whereby if you live in a country, right, that you feel like people who are very diverse, everyone has a place, inadvertently, whatever you do will also be very centrist, which means that you don't take either a left wing or right wing view. You don't take like a liberal conservative view. You try to take the middle ground. And a middle ground is less forceful, right? But it arguably is also the most important thing that the country could do, right? Now, a lot of people, I think, especially in the uh, urban quarters, right? What what urban voters want when it comes to civil liberties, when it comes to institutional reform, might be things that are very different from people not in the urban circles want, right? Which is like higher income, higher wages, more job opportunities, more investments in the country. Uh, all of those things probably matter way more to them, right? And that's not to say that institutional reforms are not important, but oftentimes I think when it comes to governing, these are matters of priority,
Mm-hmm.
whereby the government has to decide what is the most important thing to solve first, um, and whether there are certain things where they feel like either they don't have the momentum to do it, or like they're not willing to do it at this point. All of those things, I think, happens in all governments, right? To be real
Yeah.
honest with you, like Joe Biden's government eventually became about tariff sanctions as well as rebuilding industries, less about rights, less about immigrants, less about equality.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in the UK as well, after some time, it was less about all of those things and um, more about how do you build back the economy that's on the brink of like collapse, public services that are not delivering. So there are always like very competing interests, right? And I think where young people of this generation would benefit the most is actually not getting like a clean slate and then assuming that okay, this is the Malaysia I want, and let me draw it out and say that okay, I really want these things because it matters to me,
Mm-hmm.
and more like taking stock as to where Malaysia has been, the current situation now, and to know that of all of these competing interests and the dilemma that every leader has to go through, what is the what does progress look like in that book, right? Because what we also have to realize is that except after a revolution whereby you upend the entire system, you actually wouldn't have an opportunity of like just rewriting all of the rules from scratch according to your idealism, right? Chances are, most points in history in all countries, you progress is made incrementally, right? It's based on what the current situation is, what can be done now, and whether
Yeah.
that progress is better than where we were before. It doesn't have to be like super great progress, because that requires change in the system, and people naturally don't like change. um, People, however, want to know whether where they are now is actually much better than where they were before. And I think sometimes that means measuring against the time that we were in rather than measuring it against all of our idealism, because idealism are meant to always be a bit of a stretch, right? So you always end
Yeah.
up being quite frustrated, quite disappointed if you do that. So I think that is sort of how I think about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do understand that because like change is very hard to persuade, because like if things are working well, why change it, right?
Mm, mm,
Yeah, but I mean, that's quite very broad, but generally, like, if things are working well, why not change it, right? But yeah, like persuading is the hard part, and I think people need to understand that I don't think you cannot realize a nation's vision within 10 to 20 years. I think you have to go the long run, like 50, 100,
mm,
because a lot of the great nations like that are, I guess, considered, well, first world, did take a lot of time to build their country.
mm, mm,
Yeah. But yeah, but it does feel like we are, in this battle of idealism in Malaysia, coming
mm,
from different points of you know, of the political spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's one coming from the Perikatan Nasional side, and then coming from the PH side. Like it's hard. I don't know. Do you feel like the political landscape is getting more extreme? Like we can see this is a trend in Western countries, right? Like we can see in the elections of the European Union, and then was looking to like in America. Like, is it also affecting Malaysia in some way?
Yeah, I think definitely we're now at a more polarized level than many points in history. A lot of it is driven by differences in how you like what kind of country you want to build, right?
Hmm.
Uh, I I don't know if it's necessarily influenced by other countries, lah, but I think it's definitely developing a lot, especially among young people. If you look at the data, it's actually quite divided in terms of like what kind of country that everyone wants. And that makes the whole conversation about progress much harder. Because
Hmm.
what feels like progress to you in terms of institutional reform, civil liberty, rights, and so on, actually feels like a regression for people who don't believe in it, right? So how do you manage both of those tension is actually the hardest thing for any leader to manage. And if you bear that in mind, then your assessment is okay, given these heavily divided views from the people on the ground, what is a sensible step that counts as progress that doesn't alienate all of these groups, that I could make as a country? And if that's one step closer to the vision that you want, then that's progress. If it's not, then it feels like regression, right? But
Yeah.
ultimately, I don't think that there's a common view of what Malaysia is. Most of the time, people who believe in certain things have to fight for it. And I think that's what young people should remind themselves as well, which is like, um there is no rosy view of what Malaysia could be that everyone agrees on. Chances are some people agree with you, but some people don't, right? The question is, what do you do if you do believe in a certain vision of Malaysia to get it closer to it?
Hmm. Well, what's the word I'm looking for? Um, do you think that it's also part of it is because of social media with our short retention span?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, because like I don't know what I see from politicians, they would probably share a clip that looks very inspiring, very you know very persuasive,
Hmm.
but we tend to believe it very quickly.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, how some of the TikTok videos are constructed, it's meant to capture almost like this whole knee-jerk reaction that you have.
Yeah,
And the algorithm is very strong in the sense that you would be fed similar lines of thinking. And everyone knows that that's the problem, right? But at the same time, we need to also recognize the fact that having sort of like same narratives being played to you every day is a very natural part of the human process, whereby people don't like to hear things that they don't like to hear. But at the same time, it limits your growth a lot as a person when you don't hear other points of views, right? You are
yeah.
not able to be a good citizen that engages with issues well, that persuades other people, if you don't know what their point of views are, and all you know is the passions on your side, right? And in life, the more you're able to critically think about something, which requires you to take into account a lot of other points of view, the more likely you are to be an effective citizen in advocating for what you want.
Hmm. Now, talking about polarizing views, and I guess in a way, up until now, let's talk about Mahathir a bit. Yeah, because
Okay.
I think, I think it's a fact that I think he's the most consequential prime minister in Malaysia, right? I mean,
Mhm.
not only that, you know, not only he had a very tremendous 22 years of governing Malaysia, right? But he also had some flaws which are carried out until today, which is hard for us to make some of the changes that we want,
Mm,
which is, I guess, in some say, having more equally distributed wealth towards, every races in Malaysia, having equal opportunity for education, and then, we want to have equal access to workplaces and everything, and all that stuff. And I guess many more things, right? Right. Do you feel that, his legacy has more harms than benefits?
mm, I think what has been widely written on would be a lot of the how he has changed the face of institutions, right? Whereby the judiciary, had a constitutional change that really, reduced a lot of their independence and power. Um, the election commission that was largely always in favor of the government. Um, the the entire structure of the government, right? There was very much always serving the government, or it became about serving the political party or coalition of the day rather than just government and the independence of them. Um, I think that has been widely written on in terms of like the longer term implications that
I
we've had,
see.
and to be honest, it was carried on by subsequent prime ministers, including Najib, that really exploited it to the full benefit of himself, right? Um, but I think what was largely not really talked about because it requires a lot more critical thinking is his economic philosophy, right? I think his philosophy of creating super rich tycoons and expect that to be a measure of success and to trickle down has not necessarily panned out well, the way that he wanted it to. At the same time, of course, relying a lot on like mega infrastructures as like hallmarks of progress in the country has to some extent limited more real industries being built on the
Hmm.
ground, right? So I think while he took over at a time where Malaysia's economic performance really benefited from being like a poor country to like a middle income country.
Yep.
We have largely stayed in the middle income bracket for a very long time. And I think it is not least because of those policies that has like longer term implications on productivity, competitiveness, talent, that really was something that was inherited during his time and was largely unchanged until today. So I think that the thing that was not really discussed that much in the country is his economic philosophy and how some of these things, some of the problems that we have of being very stuck in the middle was
Hmm.
also due to whatever his philosophy was at that time, that you create ultra rich individuals, but a lot of people's incomes remain the same. And it wasn't a fair distribution. It wasn't uplifting, upskilling enough people that actually made a difference, lah. Right. So I think on that count, it's something that's underexplored, but I feel like it is something that represents. It's probably one of those bigger contributors to the country than whatever he's done in terms of institutions, right? The institutions ones are the most memorable, but I feel
Hmm.
like the most lasting effects that he's done actually relates to his economic philosophy.
I see. Actually, I did debated this about this a few days ago in my debate class. So like, I think one of the points that I was against Mahadi's legacy, and one of the points that really what that I used and pretty interesting as well was the fact that he, like you said, like making people ultra rich, but then you're leaving the poor behind.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. Because um, it's still quite evidently seen lah. Like there's still like a lot of poor people that are not benefiting it until today.
Mm. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that has been the struggle for Malaysia for not I mean not just Mahathir time, but I think for quite a long time already.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, and it is getting quite frustrating because it's still happening today.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah,
Yep.
but yeah, but one thing that is evidently seen is that a lot of young people are also taking a lot of initiative to make a change in their own communities, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we want to end it off somewhere here. So like, since I guess the next election will come in 2027 ish,
Mm-hmm.
right? 2027, yeah, 2027. So like, how do you think young people or the young voters should aggressively ask for change, and like how do we keep this hope in this process of this long process of nation building? Because the idea of young people that they're very impatient, and sometimes they're very idealistic. They want instant change. So how aggressive do you think they should ask for it, and how do we can keep this hope in the long run?
The most important thing that we need to do as a country, whether you're young or not, but I think young people have a larger stake in this, right? Is that after we've passed 2018, 2022, whereby you have changes in government, before this, the cause was quite simple, right? Which is like you change government as the first step and then you figure out what to do later. Um, Now the step is to actually figure out what people want the most. So, for instance, the ability for you to understand policies and how it affects the entire country, not just what you want, is very, very important, right? So we're entering this stage whereby the understanding of policies is becoming increasingly important because that's how political parties compete now. And it's still very new, right? That's why you see like a lot of the conversations about policy is still very sort of at its infancy, at that even the opposition is not able to sufficiently engage with it because we haven't thought about it long enough, right? And it's something that we have to start getting used to, right? So last time we also very used to like some parliamentary reforms, or you set term limits for the prime minister. That's one policy. What do you do in parliament to make it sort of like more accessible, higher quality of debates? That's another one.
Hmm.
Economic policies, right? In terms of like, or what do you do with like subsidies? What areas of growth should you actually encourage? How do you encourage more like startups to be formed in the country? What do you do for science and technology policy? All of these things are very new to us, but is a very mature process in a lot of developed countries like UK, Australia, US, China, India, where these conversations are actually more prominent in their psyche, right? And that's something that I think we do need to take a little bit of time to engage in them, to read up about them, and to understand them. Um, Now, in terms of what exactly, therefore, matters most to you and what you should do, is that after you had that kind of broad scan, you determine for yourself what's most important, right? It's probably going to be related to climate change as one of the biggest challenges of our
Yeah.
time. And and how do you organize people so that what you want actually gets implemented, right? And it's not as simple as, oh, I want people to care about the environment, or like I want our country to like be more concerned at the COP28 platform, where we actually mention more about economy and where we are in the world. It's more specific than that, right? Which is like, are there particular policies that you think are important for the government to push through when it comes to relating to climate change that is not currently done? And once you have that peace of mind, then you have to organize people who believe in the same things as you do, and to apply pressure on government so that they actually implement it, right? So that you have a platform, you meet the minister, and then you present to the minister, and hopefully they pass a bill in parliament or they implement it as a policy. All of these things are very important as building blocks of what needs to be done in order to get what you want, right? But I really think that we're at that stage as a country whereby we haven't really made up our minds as to what is most important for us, as to what we want. And therefore, we are very reactive to things that we like and we don't like by the government, and we make up our mind based on that. And I think um, we can be a more engaged citizen uh, in before actually because there's a huge risk here of like just being very disengaged, sort of opting out of the system um, when when we don't understand it even deeper as to what is required for a country. Granted the fact that a lot of these understanding of what needs to be done in the country is quite complex, it can get quite difficult for people, and therefore you do need to take a little bit of time to understand it in order to know what needs to be done.
Mhm. I guess some last words. I guess like from the book that you wrote from San Kancil, what do you think the young people out there can like benefit from this from the stories of these ordinary Malaysians? And I think I'm pretty sure one of the points that you're gonna say is about being resilient.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think ultimately what this book is trying to remind us is that there are a lot of people who are like us, who care about the country, who are doing a lot of things in their own capacity to make the world a better place. And I think it's a good it's a good sort of like thing to hold in your heart, especially when you go through the grind of like your studies, finding a job. Oftentimes you lose sight about what needs to be done for the country in order to improve it and to play your part, because it's very tempting at some point to care about sort of only what is in it for me rather than what is the best thing to do for the country. And I think there are many steps that you can take. This book is a reminder of like how many things that people can do in their own capacity to make a difference, and uh, how much it does relate to a longer term change in the country. And I think other than the very obvious fact that you shouldn't lose hope, it is also a lesson of like what you said, resilience, the ability to bounce back, the ability to not give up. um, Only then we can realize our reserve potential, right, of being a nation that constantly tries. And hopefully at certain bouts in um, our nation's history, we have moments of success. And that's how it works for everyone, which is that you're not waiting for someone else to help you solve a certain problem. You're not expecting politicians to change in order for you to get the country that you want. We are as important and part and parcel of that change making process. And the sooner we realize that, the sooner we are able to take action in order to get the country closer to where it's supposed to go.
Very nice words. Very 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 nice last words.
Mm,
And I think I think 73 is was one of the heaviest segments, I think, in my
mm,
opinion. Because we did talk a lot about politics, reformasi, talking about whether Mahathir's legacy was impacted a lot in Malaysia, and
mm,
whether or not political party are getting more extreme. Though I understand that it's a very heavy topic. Not all of us could, for what's the word? Not all of us could like digest it properly. Even I
mm,
have a hard time doing it.
mm, mm,
But like, I think one thing that I would like to take away from this podcast is that you know we have we have we can find hope in ordinary people, and
mm,
there are still some changes and still some things that that requires us to put more attention.
mm,
But we need to keep ourselves informed and push forward,
mm,
because to get the change that we want, we may not see in our lifetime,
mm,
but at least the ideas but at least the perjuangan is um is ongoing.
Mm.
Yeah, and 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 I want to say thank you so much, Simlish, for having the time for. I mean, we tried to do it an hour, but I guess things got a little bit more interesting.
Mm, mm, mm.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, thanks so much for having me, and I hope that your podcast has all the success that is due. And yeah, I'm very happy that you found a lot of resonance in the book as well.
yeah, and you know what? I really hope that we can actually hang out in real life. I know
Mm.
we've met once, but maybe we can hang out some more because I
Yes,
feel like
yes,
there's
yes.
more ideas that we can talk about.
Mm, mm. Okay, definitely, definitely. I think
Yeah,
that's a
yeah.
good idea.
Thank you for listening to 2 hours of Whatnot John Malepa on this Merdeka. And thank you so much, James Chess, again for coming on the podcast. And yeah, you can listen to this podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and any other streaming platform out there. And you can follow us on mainly on Instagram and also LinkedIn for general purposes. And I guess if you're very old, Facebook. And then what about you, James? Where can you follow you and where can we look at your work?
I think LinkedIn as well. So James Chai on LinkedIn would be the best way to reach out to me. Other than that, I think I'm not really on that many platforms that I publish my work. So I think that's still the best way.
Okay, okay, sure, sure. And that, thank you for listening to another episode of One on Malepa. I hope this episode was informing, very inspiring, and also gives a little perspective of what Kancil is all about. And till then, we'll see you in the next episode, or maybe in the next documentary where we're going to release it in September. Till then.